All right, guys, let's go. We're live.
All right, a pleasant good afternoon, Bahamas, and welcome to another Citizens Response Live panel. My name is Stefan Evans. I am a guest host tonight, and I am also the engagement coordinator at the Organization for Responsible Governance, which is a nonprofit organization that exists to promote good governance practices in the Bahamas on the part of the government through policy development and also to engage with citizens to get more Bahamian people involved and engaged in the space of helping to chart the course for the future of our humble nation. Tonight we have a very special guest, and I will invite her to just offer some brief remarks in just a moment. But as we get started, I want to encourage everyone that is joining us via Facebook to share the broadcast with your friends so that more persons can glean from the discussion tonight, which we truly expect will be very enlightening, very encouraging, and give us a lot to think about in terms of where we go from here. The country is in a very interesting state at this time. And we know that it's going to take the power of Bahamian people who we know to be strong and resilient, even in the face of some of the most trying times that certainly we've seen in our lifetime and that our country has seen in its existence. But through it all, we believe that in our nation, among our lies the insight, lies the talent, lies the education, the drive, passion that we need in order to actually progress and to make things happen. So we're not looking at this from a hopeless perspective. We're not here to simply complain, but we've actually come to discuss, what do we do next? What is the plan? And that word, we know that that has come on constantly throughout this situation. And so as Bahamian people, we are demanding that we operate at a standard where we have a plan that charts the course. And so we're going to dive into a little bit of what that looks like tonight. Um, for those of you that are joining us on Facebook and here on Zoom, feel free at any point to offer your comments, your feedback, any questions that you may have in the comment section and in the chat section on Zoom, and we will be glad to accommodate as many of them as we possibly can. So without further ado, I want to firstly say thank you to all of our panelists for joining us tonight. I will give them the opportunity to briefly introduce themselves. But firstly, I want to say a very special welcome to Mrs. Arinthia Komolafe, who we know is the leader of the Democratic National Alliance. We are very excited to have you.
Yes, hello, good evening. Thank you. It's good to be here tonight.
Yes, and I just want to give my fellow panelists who will be asking some of the questions that we hope that will, I want to say, pull and glean on your wisdom in a way that is most effective and that we could really see some movement and some good discussion being had. I want to give you all the opportunity and in any order to quickly introduce yourselves and say who you represent or any detail that you would like for the public to be aware of.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Joseph Charlton Lewis IV. I'm a banker by profession, but pretty much I'm very loud on Facebook. And that's one of the things, I guess that's one of the reasons why I'm here. Ms. Komolafe, it's good to see you. It's the first time I'm meeting you, and I have a lot of questions because I think that this country needs a bit of a paradigm shift, and I'm hoping that you can show us that shift. So I do have a lot of questions because I do want to dig deeper into your politics and to see, how you think. What do you think? How are we going to proceed? So yeah, excited about that.
All right, so I'm Dion DeCosta Gibson, also known as Gibby the Farmer. I am a agriculturalist, sustainable agriculturalist, and a young Bahamian activist, enthusiast for everything. My plight is agriculture, but I'm a Bahamian, I'm a nationalist at heart. And having studied in Cuba, I won't even go any further. And I'm just gonna say I studied in Cuba. And I think I don't know Ms. Komolafe personally, but I think that I've admired her. I admire your stance on all the national issues that are going on right now. And so I look forward to a lively discussion and a very, I think, I don't want to say intellectual, but a conversation that's gonna maybe project the way forward for our country. And I will leave it there before we get into the crux of things.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I know that one or two other persons may be joining us live to offer commentary, but we'll actually get started. So first and foremost, I always think that there are a few things that need to be established. I want to preempt this entire discussion by bringing to everyone who is joining us, everyone who is here on Facebook and Zoom, and for those of you that will watch, a very important concept that I would like to relay to you is the fact that when it comes to good governance, when it comes to decision making that benefits all people, when it comes to inclusion and representation of Bahamian people in the way that we handle crisis, in the way that we operate as a nation, a very, very important concept that we need to see at the forefront more would be a more diverse array of stakeholders adding to the conversation and not just talking, but in a formal way that allows for their input to be valued and incorporated into the process of decision making. These kind of processes, they include the official government representatives, members of parliament, cabinet ministers, but we're not just talking exclusively to those individuals. Good representation will also include members of the opposition. Good representation will also include members of other political parties like the Democratic National Alliance, and good representation most certainly represents the voice of the citizen. With more voices, with more hands in the proverbial pot, sometimes it feels like it can become confusing, but we know that we can cover more bases and we are stronger when we are united. And our motto says that we are one people united in love and in service. So this is the kind of concept that we are hoping to push through these sorts of discussions. As we dive right into it, we must pause to acknowledge that yesterday marked the 1-year anniversary of the passage of Hurricane Dorian, which we are all aware was a devastating blow, particularly on the islands and keys of Grand Bahama and Abaco. And so first and foremost, we offer our heartfelt condolences to those that have lost people and are still trying to figure out the way, to those that are still struggling. People are living in conditions that you know we may forget about in the comforts of our own homes, but things are pretty difficult. And we actually wanted to start tonight's conversation acknowledging that reality and talking a little bit about where we are in regard to that, because we've had two recent state of emergencies declared, one after Hurricane Dorian, and we're in one now. And what does that even mean? What does it mean? I actually want to give Mrs. Komolafe the opportunity to comment on the current situation with regard to where we're at in terms of we've made these declarations. And the expectation of the Bahamian people is that now we will make plans and we will put action and thought into where we go from here, how we rebuild and how we recover. So before we even get to the COVID-19 situation and beyond, Ms. Komolafe, I just want to ask you, what is your opinion on how we've handled this situation, on where the Bahamian people are and your general views on where we should really be going from here?
Well, once again, good evening. Thank you, Mr. Evans. Thank you for this opportunity to be here on this platform, which I feel very privileged and honored to be joining this group of esteemed panelists. I'm looking forward to the questions and the engagement. I would like to also welcome those who are joining via Zoom and Facebook. And I join with you as well in extending heartfelt condolences to the families who would have lost loved ones and friends during the passage of or in the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian, which, as you rightly stated, yesterday marked the first year when those persons would have gone through a tragedy that none of us could have imagined. And some of them, as you mentioned, are still putting the pieces of their lives back together. And so we must continue to keep them in our hearts, in our prayers, and in our thoughts. This has been a very challenging time for us as a nation. COVID-19, as you said, we'll get to later, but even before Dorian, we've been struggling. We've been having challenges. It seems as though we have had a deficiency in vision in charting the way forward, a strategic path forward for the prosperity of this nation. It seemed that we got to a particular point and then we plateaued, which is unfortunate because there's still a lot of uncharted territory in these beautiful islands called the Bahamas, and there is a lot of development still left to take place. What is unfortunate about where we are in the development of our nation, even before COVID-19 took hold of the world, really, was is what's unfortunate is the lack of development, redevelopment that we have seen on those two major islands, Grand Bahama and Abaco. In the aftermath, we all know Grand Bahama itself was already struggling before Dorian, going all the way back to 2004 and 2005 with Hurricanes Francis and Jane, and everything that has been transpiring since then, and the loss of business that they've had in the number one sector in our economy, which is tourism. But in addition to that, it's just been very difficult to get that economy jump started there for a number of factors, which we may be able to get into later on in the discussion. But certainly we can all agree that Grand Bahama has had its challenges at least for the past decade. And now with the passage of Dorian, we had Abaco. And with both of those islands going offline, we lost somewhere at the minimum, some $200+ million in revenue, which is very significant in the bigger scheme of things. And even greater was the fact that we lost jobs there. Now, these were two islands that were already, Grand Bahama was in the double digits unemployment, and Abaco was moving in that direction pre-Dorian. Well, there's no doubt that they are exactly there. And of course, the Bahamas as a whole has gotten worse since then. What I believe, though, is that we have missed the opportunity to press the reset button. We missed it with Dorian, and currently we're missing it with COVID-19. But as you said, we'll get into that later. But it's really unfortunate to see where we are there after the level of disaster that would have taken place there. There are still thousands of persons who are displaced, who have nowhere to stay. Obviously, there are still thousands of persons who are out of work. There are still thousands of persons who are out of electricity 1 year later, right? There's still, and this is, to me, I still feel that there was time to do this even before COVID took place, and which would have been in March when we would have experienced the first set of lockdowns. There was a sufficient amount of time for us to move toward the restoration. I'm not underestimating the level of damage that was there. It's the worst we have seen, certainly in my lifetime, and I'm sure most persons on this call lifetime. But I believe that the delay that took place in the aftermath of the storm contributed to where we are today. And so there's still a lot that has to be done in order for us to move forward in a stronger direction. But I believe that we can rebuild stronger and more resilient. But we have to have the vision and we have to have the will to be able to do that.
Most definitely. And I think what is truly important about just the approach and listening to you speak on that situation is the fact that one of the things, and I'm going to be very candid, I just want to put that out there, but one of the things that a lot of people have realized has been missing from the response to emergency, I won't even single out Dorian, but certainly along with the Dorian response, is that we have not been talking a lot about the actual state that people are in and what they are experiencing and what they are feeling. There have been a lot of broad terms that have been passed around. We've been talking about the cleanup efforts and the this and the that, but you know, people are still without electricity. Can we start there? People's homes are still destroyed. There's a lot of work to be done. And when you think toward a place where we want to see people come together to progress, we have to consider what they are feeling and what they are going through. Dion, I know that you are a survivor of the storm, so I certainly want to give you the opportunity to share your perspective on this matter as well.
Thank you, Stefan, for that. You know, I'll be honest with you. I'll be honest with everyone watching. It's been a emotional, somber kind of period. The last, I would say from actually August 31st, because I remember, you know, getting myself together the last couple hours on August 31st. I was battling up other people's homes. The apartment I lived in, thankfully, my landlord had hurricane windows, and And I went through an experience, but it wasn't as bad as most people. I'll be very honest. But in seeing the aftermath of what happened, and granted, I did have to leave where I was because I lived by myself, and I decided to stay with some friends. There were about 10 of us in one place in a 3-bedroom apartment. And then during that first half of the storm, we had to make a decision that, water started pouring through, the sheetrock was falling out the roof, the shingles and tar paper off the roof was gone. We had to leave during the eye. And I'm just giving you all a little glimpse of what happened during Dorian, mind you. And during the eye, I went outside. I had a little Chevy S there, an old truck. They got a small SUV, and we knew that we couldn't stay there. I started my truck. We started the SUV. We said, okay, our vehicles are running. We're going to make whatever move we can make in this period of time. And we made it to my apartment, a one-bedroom apartment with 10 people, 5 adults and 5 children. And, we made that move. We fared fairly well, pretty well. There was still water coming in, but there was a dry part of the house. But the greatest trauma that I would say was after the storm, leaving there, visiting other people who most of them were good. And although people were good, you would not have wanted to see the places they made it out of. And I want to drive this point home that I have friends from Crown Haven to Sandy Point. And we all know that not every part of Abaco was affected, but they were because there was no power in a lot of these areas for a long time. And some of them who weren't even damaged by the storm are still suffering power outages. I worked at Baker's Bay for 2 years, and I know that Guanaki, Baker's Bay is going through a lot right now, the rebuilding. And we may think that, oh, Baker's Bay got money, whatever. This storm was the great equalizer. I belong to a fraternity that says the death is the grand equalizer, but I tell you, Dorian is the equalizer before death, because I hugged people who would have never spoken to me before. I hugged people who I personally may have not spoken to before. And I'm going to be real, it was a situation that leveled all man and sundry. We became one because we experienced something, whether you were in a home that was secure or you were holding on to a post. I've had people who told me they held on to a 4x4 post for their life and watched things fly by them. So I don't want to talk about the aftermath, because we could talk about that. I haven't been back to Abaco since October, but I'm in constant communication. I have friends who are watching this right now who are still suffering, who have gone back and are still on generators, and they can't get a good night's sleep because the generator is still humming every night, and they have to go and buy fuel every single day. And I mean, we have to be real as Bahamians, and, I'm going to drive a small point home. Bahamians we are people. Maybe not you or I or Ms. Komolafe or Joseph, but we are people who tend to look down on people who are from other Caribbean countries. I have friends, I studied in Cuba, and as I said, I have friends who from all over the Caribbean. And I know when they came together as countries and they brought their power services back up, we had power companies from outside the Caribbean come here to help us. But we are still suffering because we are too boastful and too braggadocious in our ways. I'm scared the marsh corns. We braggadocious in our ways, and that we say, okay, we got it from here. I got friends working for BPL in Abaco right now who were there prior, left, came back because they realized they got to help. And they going through some hardships. I mean, we say COVID is the next topic, but COVID added to that blow, let's be real about that. We cannot avoid that. COVID attacked. I mean, I will not say that the government did everything, but whatever the government was doing, COVID definitely put a huge dent into what they were doing. But as a survivor, as someone who lived there and know people who are there, my heart goes out to all of my friends and family members who are there, and we can only pray that we collectively, because it's going to take a collective, that we can collectively come together and try to find a way. And I have no doubt that Abaco and Grand Bahama will probably and should return for the better as a result of this, because we now have a reset. We can press that reset button and say, okay, things were good before, but let's make it better now. That's my response to that.
And thank you so much, first and foremost, for being able to share a personal story. We know that these things impact everyone in a different way. And so we're praying for you, and we continue to pray for all of those affected. Joseph, I do want to give you the opportunity to chime in. But one of the things that I definitely want to talk about, as because we could begin to bring now this COVID situation into the midst of things. But so when it comes to, we say that the government has not done enough, has not moved quickly enough. A lot of us feel that way, and not only do a lot of us feel that way, but in our Prime Minister's most recent message to the country, he admitted that there were some things that should have been done a little better, some things that should have happened. But my question in the midst of this, as we now consider Hurricane Dorian and to the COVID-19 situation, and we consider the fact that people's ability to be resilient and to respond to government-led initiatives and all of these things are based on their personal circumstance. No matter how strong we want people to be, people have been impacted in ways that they would have never imagined over the past year of tragedy after tragedy, it seems, for very many people. So as we have this conversation, I do want to tangibly talk about what are these things that the government should have been doing? Because where's the line? There are some people saying that people are putting such a high level of expectation. The government needs to build my house back. The government needs to do this, need to feed me, need to do this and to do that. And I'm not knocking any of it, but those are some of the comments working in the community that I've heard. But so my question is, Ms. Komolafe, I want you to answer this, but Joseph, I do want to give you the opportunity to contribute before I ask her to give her response. But where are the lines? What are these things specifically that the government has fallen down on? Because we need to be able to identify so that we can address where the deficiencies are.
Okay, for me, I think the biggest issue that we're faced with is that we have already acknowledged that Dorian occurred. And I think that that's something that that a lot of the government officials continue to do. They continue to reference the fact that Bahamians are resilient. We know this. They continue to say, they could continue to reiterate what would have happened, and it's almost considered emotional porn at this point. The issue is, what's the plan? What's next? What are we going to do next? And I think that that's what continue to happen. And I think what has to happen is the government has to come to us with a plan, with some sort of policies. What are you going to do now? Like, what's your next step? Stop telling me the same things over and over again. Do you have a plan for Grand Bahama? Persons in Grand Bahama, I mean, if you look at it, Grand Bahama still has a tent for hospital. A year later, how can this continue to be? I mean, they've said this, but they have not given us any clear indication of what they're going to do next. I think that that's what people want to hear. We don't want to hear fables of yesteryear. Yes, we know Bahamians have gone through hurricanes before. We're going through COVID. We're strong. We're this and that. But what are you going to do? I think most Bahamians, if you were to ask them what they want from the government, let me know what you're going to do. Just give me a plan. Just give me some. I don't need hope. I need action. I think that that's what needs to happen at this point in time. And I'm from Nassau, so of course I can only be empathetic. I don't know what it feels like. I've never been through a major hurricane, and so I can only be empathetic to the plight of the persons in Grand Bahama and the persons in Abaco. But there are people who live in these islands that are very dear to me, and I constantly hear the cry, and it brings tears to my eyes sometimes to hear them, to recall the moments, when water started to come into their house. I can't tell you what that feels like. The only thing that I can say now at this point is that I need to know what the government's going to do. What are your plans? What are you going to do? And that's really what I need to hear that.
Most definitely. Thank you so much, Joseph. So Mrs. Komolafe, could you share with us some of the specific areas that we should be demanding that this happens, that this happens? These are the areas, or because for a lot of us, just like Joseph said, we want to plan, but even trying to nail down like what are the particular areas that we need to be addressing have become such a challenge.
Well, firstly, and having a plan is absolutely necessary. The first thing I want to say, I want to go back just a bit. In the immediate aftermath of the storm, I was able to hitch a hike up to Abaco and literally hitch a hike on a plane to get up there to see what things were like there on the ground. I went there with a team just to do an assessment. And when I got there, I thought there was a bit of an exaggeration about the stench of death that people were talking about, but it was truly real when you got there. And I ended up participating in the evacuation exercise. And there were a lot of persons that would have left Abaco and moved up to New Providence primarily and other islands. I did the same thing, traveled up to Grand Bahama the following week at the earliest opportunity and actually got stuck on the ground there because there are no lights on the airport. And that's another conversation to have. There are no lights on the runway. So flights cut off at a particular period. And because we were all hitching rides and there were so many persons just trying to get out to be evacuated from the islands, I ended up getting stuck in the rush, in the mad rush. But again, we were there helping persons evacuate. Why do I raise that point? I have come across so many persons in New Providence who came up from Abaco, who came up from Grand Bahama, who are still here. Now I go back to the point of what were we like pre-Dorian? New Providence was already overpopulated. There was already an exodus taking place from other islands, particularly Grand Bahama as well, as I mentioned, their economy there. And then after the storms of Irma and Joaquin, we had some persons come up to New Providence as well. So if you are sitting in the position of policy making and you have the power to make some changes, you know your first order of business is, first of all, you cannot continue to have this mass exodus coming up to the capital city, which happens to be the smallest island in the archipelago, in the chain of archipelago. So as best as you can start to rebuild those islands, you should start to rebuild those islands. When I went to Abaco right after Dorian, and then when I went back again, January at the beginning of this year, sad to say, I saw no major difference. It just goes to show you how slow the cleanup efforts was, just the cleanup efforts. And if you cannot move the debris, when I got there, you can tell that there were perhaps whirlwinds or whatever the case may be, because trailers were all over the place. When I got back there in January, the trailers were still all over the place. So you can't even move to the place of electricity. If you can't get electricity restored on the island, then you cannot get commerce restored. There were so many missed deadlines just to get the electricity restored. And if you cannot get electricity restored on the island, then you can't get persons back there on the island. I went into Spring City where the dooms in South Africa, when I went up to Spring City, where the domes were being built. When I went there in January of this year, there were 7 domes. Now, bear in mind, there was at least $10 million set aside to purchase these domes for persons to be able to live in. They were ill-advised. It was ill-advised to go and purchase these domes. But in speaking with the residents there in Abaco and walking through the community of Spring City, there were so many damaged homes. When you take the average cost of those domes and you look at the damage that had taken place to homes in Spring City, funds that were spent on those domes could have been allocated to persons, helping persons to repair their homes. I don't believe the government should pay for everything, but these were extraordinary circumstances. This was an entire island that was devastated. There was no commerce there. The government had a duty to step in, okay? So that was the first mistake, not moving quickly enough to clear up the debris, to get electricity restored as soon as possible, missing all the deadlines after borrowing the funds to be able to move forward. Because if you recall, the midterm budget was held at the beginning of this year and we borrowed funds. There was a whole program held to raise funds via pledges and $250 million at least. And a lot of those funds were supposed to go toward the restoration of Abaco and Grand Bahama. And I will get into that later with COVID, because we saw that ended up rolling into the COVID plans and mitigating against COVID. So first things first is trying to get those individuals back on Grand Bahama and Abaco as quickly as possible. We know that when Dorian made landfall on September 1st, we were still in the midst of the hurricane season. Fortunately, we did not have another storm after that. But here we are 1 year later, and we are still having problems with shelters. The shelters that were put on the list even for this year's hurricane season were still compromised. And we spoke about that. We spoke about the report that came from the IMO, the International Office on Migration, and speaking about the fact that those shelters were compromised. Even though the government went and set up a whole new agency, the Disaster Recovery Authority, we have not seen what is being produced coming out of that, right? What I would have liked to have seen, again, like I say, a more fast mobilization of things there to get infrastructure back in place there, but also a new plan or some legislation coming forward for revising the building code. We are living in a new normal. We understand that climate change is a reality for the Bahamas. We know that we live in a hurricane zone. This is not something that is new to us. Yes, many of us could not have anticipated Dorian, but or the extent to the damage that the storm would have brought upon the country, but we could have anticipated strong storms because we had that with Joaquin and we had that with Matthew. And yet we still missed the opportunity to be able to put in the legal infrastructure and the statutory infrastructure to be able to ward against such disasters. So we missed an opportunity. We've been talking about a disaster risk plan to be able to deal with things like catastrophic storms. We've been talking also about moving toward a greener and more alternative form of energy. And I note that we're still moving forward with the same energy source that we were moving forward before Dorian, when we have the opportunity to really turn those two islands green and implement alternative sources, and we are missing that opportunity. And again, as I said, we're missing an opportunity to really look at a new form of commerce on those two islands, because as an archipelago, we can move from island to island in terms of the development of this country. And I would like to speak about this moving forward, really the plans that we have for each island throughout the archipelago. So there is a lot much more that could have been done. And as I said, it's just unfortunate that we're seeing this delay in things being mobilized on those two islands.
That is certainly several powerful concepts. I'm filling out my little notebook in front of me with so many notes. But Mrs. Komolafe, one of the things that I certainly want to highlight from all of what you just said is that a concept that I've been sharing with our community over at org is this idea of, I want to say the Band-Aid effect, where we know that we need immediate solutions to a lot of the issues that are being faced, particularly when it comes to things like power generation and the rebuilding of homes and housing in general. But based on a lot of the things that you said, they represent movements toward long-term solutions to the problems that Bahamians are facing. If we look at the situation, things like rental power generation, things like the domes, if we consider COVID, things like the food assistance program and this stipend program, I'm not even sure what to call it because it certainly doesn't represent all of the parameters of a good stimulus package as it has been called. But these are all temporary fixes, and there are bigger issues that we are seeing here. We need sound power generation. We don't need rental power generation. We need, and we know that there have been some movements in that direction, but it's just an example of several of the things that we tend to do. And when we borrow, every cent should really be invested into solutions that not only correct the issue right there at hand, but that pushes the country forward. We diverted from the food security task force to the food distribution. And I will always point this out every time I get the opportunity, that the problem in that is we are not looking at how we're going to feed ourselves long term. We're looking at correcting a temporary situation. We're going to run out of money if we do it that way because we're already borrowing, as you pointed out. And these things are often overly politicized, but it is the truth of the matter that in order for us to move forward, we need to be able to put forth sustainable and long-term solutions. I want to give you the opportunity to continue to talk to us a little bit more about this localized plan from island to island, so that when we do give commentary, we have the opportunity to hear a lot more of the meat of what you want to share with us. So please feel free to tell us a little bit more about not just the approach from island to island, but why such an approach is an important stance that we need to be taking when we look at moving forward as a nation.
Absolutely. Well, I can tell you, I looked at the 2008-2009 global and financial economic crisis. I was still functioning in the financial services industry at that time. And I saw the writing on the wall even before it had its impact here in the Bahamas. One of the things that we witness when there are these global external shocks that tend to take place, like the global financial crisis and like COVID now as we're experiencing, a lot of the industries, particularly our number 1 and 2 industry, tend to take a hard blow. And so we saw a lot of investors leaving in the hospitality industry. We saw a lot of banks closing down their operations here in the Bahamas, and we lost a lot of good, well-paying jobs. But the problem with that is that they're all just in the service sector. And there's nothing wrong with having a service-based economy. A lot of economies globally are service-based economies. But I was a finance student and a business student, and one of the most prudent investors has a balanced portfolio, and they have a diverse portfolio. And when you look at the economy of the contributors to the Bahamian economy is not as diverse as it needs to be. And I know we've been talking about this for a long time, but that's all we've really been doing, talking about it. And we've not really put forward a plan and a strategy for us to be able to execute that. And so immediately then, and it was at this point that I started to write, because I had so many thoughts going on in my mind, that I started to write. And I used to write a weekly column in the Nassau Guardian every week from 2012 up to 2017 when I announced for candidacy in the 2017 general election. And I would talk about these plans and the strategies and the things that we needed to do. And one of the things that I understood was that, you know, we've been sold this lie, for example, that we had no natural resources all our lives. And now we find out that we have natural resources. Well, the other plan that we've been, the other lies that we've been sold is we can't produce. We can't produce on an agricultural level, and we can't become a producing country, which is a lie, because we can become a producing country. And when I, moving toward the 2012 general election and in conversations that I had with the former prime minister, I asked him, I wanted to work in a specific area that would have focused on the domestic economy and building up the small to medium enterprise sector. I knew that he was a prime minister that was very focused on foreign direct investment because that was the way his first term went. But I understood after the '08 crisis that we needed to create some buffers here and create more sustainable jobs. And there were surveys done that showed that while a significant percentage of the businesses in the country were Bahamian owned, they made a very small contribution to gross domestic product. It is very skewed, right? And so I wanted to be able to build that sector more. And the areas that I wanted to focus on, and he did put me in a position. I became the managing director of the Bahamas Development Bank and immediately went to writing a strategic plan and wanted to focus on 3 areas: energy, the agricultural sector, and manufacturing, because these are all jobs that these are all industries that create sustainable jobs, and they have more staying power in terms of they contribute more to gross domestic product, or they could contribute to the growth in gross domestic product. And on the manufacturing side, I spoke about this whole idea. The tourism industry, I don't have a problem with it being the number 1 industry, but I don't think we have leveraged it enough in terms of being able to create spin-off opportunities from that industry. So for example, on New Providence, we have a lot of these mega resorts. But when you go inside the mega resort, the soap that you're going to use is foreign made and foreign imported. The shampoo and the conditioner that you're going to use is foreign made and foreign imported. And you can imagine if when we look up at these heads of agreements, which is something that I would like to look at in reviewing those heads of agreements, where there is more benefits for Bahamians outside of just jobs inside these hotels, where there is a commitment to be able to use Bahamian products inside these establishments. Now, I know we have it to some extent in the agribusiness sector. You will find some jams and you'll find some jellies and something to that extent, but we need to create more spin-off jobs. That means then that the government has to have a very strategic policy on and intentional on wanting to improve the productive sectors in this country. That is going to require some commitment in terms of resources, people resources, land resources, and capital investment for persons to be able to get inside these industries, and some are already there, and the ones who are there to be able to expand. So that was that in terms of the light manufacturing, moving more toward an industrialized nation, and then agriculture, which is very, very passionate for me, because to your point about us moving from giving persons a fish as opposed to teaching them how to fish by moving the food security committee now to a food distribution committee, not putting that focus that we need to on the agricultural sector. And I spoke about this, that in this budget, it was a hold the line budget, the last budget exercise that we just came out. It was not a budget, it was very underwhelming, and it missed the opportunity to set, where we had to set the reset button. The couple of $1 million that they've put at disposal to be able to have some backyard farming and some aquaponics farms here and there, it's not going to make a major impact into the agricultural sector. We need to be able to put more capital investment inside that sector. The vision that we have in the DNA is to get to the point where we can produce, to the point where we can consume, and then move to export. And the reason why we need to be thinking with a production and export mindset is because where we find ourselves today, we have no tourist dollars coming in. We have no foreign direct investment coming in, but we're still spending because we still have to eat and we still have to drive our cars and we still need electricity. So we're still purchasing oil and we're still purchasing food, right? So that our reserves are going down every month because we are still purchasing these items that we need to live from day to day. But when I talk about a diversified portfolio, we need to find more ways to earn foreign currency. And agri-processing and agriculture is one of the ways that we can do that, while at the same time killing the bird of being able to feed yourself. And so when I talk about the diversification of the Bahamian economy, I look at it also through the lens of the diversification of the Bahamian Islands, right? So we talked about this whole idea of Andros, and Andros being the breadbasket, where you have all of that land there, and a lot of it is arable land as well, where you can have large-scale farming there, right, to be able to supply food to your people. But that doesn't mean that Andros is the only island that has to produce, but that is what Andros is going to be largely known for, farming as well as marine. And in this regard, this is why I think the BAMSI Institute, the BAMSI is a good initiative, perhaps just not functioning in the way that it needs to function. Because when I think about Andros, I think about agricultural development on a large scale, but I also think about marine research and biology and persons being able to come here to conduct research. But I also think about ecotourism, because we have the third largest barrier reef there in Andros, and persons from this side of the world in the Western Hemisphere travel many times on the other side of the world to go to Australia, to go to the largest barrier reef in the world. And I don't know that we have marketed that to the extent that we need to market it in. So you can have a dominant industry on an island. So like for Andros, your dominant industry would be agriculture, but then you can have minor or sub-industries like ecotourism, like research. The same thing with Grand Bahama. We tried to turn, as a nation, I speak like that, we tried to turn Grand Bahama into or create the same model that we're experiencing here in New Providence, which when I look at New Providence is the hub for hospitality because we have all of these mega resorts here. It is also the hub for financial services because one time ago, every major bank in the world you can find in the Bahamas right here on the island in New Providence. That's why we are a bona fide international financial center, although some factions in the international community try to brand us otherwise. We are a bona fide international financial center. This here, New Providence has already been branded as a place to come for sun, sand, and sea, as well as somewhere where you can come for international banking. And we should continue to maintain that. And New Providence should be a center of excellence for financial services and for services in the hospitality industry. And persons throughout the world, and indeed the region and the world, should be coming here to learn from us because we've been doing this for so long and we are pros at this. But when I look at Grand Bahama, you can have a spin-off industry like tourism, which they've been trying with, you see, with the Grand Alukaya and all of that. But it was really set up to be an industrial island, and we should not move away from that. If we already have a free trade zone there, we were ahead of our time with the free trade zone, with the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, which again, I talk about Grand Bahama, and we'll talk about that later. I don't want to go off on a tangent, but the fact of the matter is we were ahead of our time with that agreement. It's just poorly executed in these most recent years. But when you look at the global community and countries in the Arab world and how they're moving toward these free trade zones, they are benefiting more from a model that we already had, that we did not take advantage of because we simply didn't know how to use it, right? And so the vision for Grand Bahama is more of it being that industrialized sector, that industrial island that it ought to be, where we are producing all manner of things up there, whatever the case may be. And I talked about these spin-off effects in the hospitality industry, soaps and shampoos and conditioners, where there's even fashion designers up there producing whatever it is that we can produce. We should know that Grand Bahama is the hub for producing in that particular area. And of course, it has a deep harbor port, and shipping is a major industry there, and persons come there and they do dry dock and all of that. Something that can rival the likes of the Panama Canal. As we continue to move down the chain, and before I get to moving down the chain, I just want to talk to you about the whole idea of diversification of the Bahamian economy and what we continue to talk about in addition to tourism and financial services. There are three things that I'm extremely passionate about. I already talked about the agriculture and moving toward food security, but there's also the blue economy and there's also the orange economy, where there's large potential in those. The first one I want to talk about is the orange economy because that's the one I'm very excited about. It is more tapping into the creative industry. What I found about the younger generations, they're like us, some of the previous generations where we go to school, we get an education, and then we get a good 9 to 5. But what you can find with them as well is they have a side hustle. They probably DJing, they probably doing some makeup, they probably out there shooting a video or shooting some commercials. They are also operating in that creative space on the side until they get to a point where they can do it full time. When I talk about foreign currency, the ability to earn more foreign currency, you can do that through a food security policy, but you can also do that through the orange economy. We know in the United States of America, they have Hollywood. We know in India, they have Bollywood. We know in Nigeria, they have Nollywood. This vision I talk about speaks about Bahamawood. It's a village, a cultural village that just houses creatives from diverse backgrounds. I mean, these are persons that are producing film, they're writing plays, they're producing music, and they're looking and they're just, and of course, they're also operating in a digitized environment with the highest level of technology that is available to them. And when you can imagine a digital platform that you can go to in the Bahamas, you can call it Bahama Flix if you wanted to, like Netflix, where you can go and find Bahamian content, which is what people want. People want to consume, Bahamians want to consume their content. When you see some of these creatives like Sawyer Boy and like Jaquay and those, people love their content. And when you see some of our musicians, people love their content, but we don't have the environment to be able to cultivate that. If we have a village where creatives are just there and all they're there to do is just to think, to create, and to produce, and you take that to a digital platform for persons to be able to consume, And they do that by way of subscription, the same way we subscribe to Netflix and the same way we subscribe to an HBO online or the NBA. And you get that where persons are consuming that locally, but then you also have the capacity to export that too. Because now when you look at a platform like Netflix, Netflix is buying Bollywood films, they're buying Nollywood films, and obviously they have Hollywood films and wherever else. There is another market out there, a global market for us to be able to tap into so that our creatives are able to convert their talent and monetize it and be able to benefit from it. But at the same time, what you are doing is exporting Bahamian culture in forms that we have not even, we probably dreamed about them, but we haven't dreamed or dared to move toward the strategy to implementing these things. And so when I think about that, there are also spin-off jobs for barbers, for people, for hairstylists, for fashion designers. There are all sorts of spin-off jobs in these creative spaces. And so the orange economy is something that we talk about when we look at the new Bahamas that has to factor in very strongly to the diversification of the Bahamian economy. And then there's the blue economy that moves toward exploring our natural resources in the sea. And you think about it, you go inside the store, you purchase a can of tuna, you purchase a can of sardine, you purchase corned beef, you think nothing of it. But that corned beef came from some cow up in the United States. That tuna came from some water up in the United States, and the same thing with the sardine. Well, within our seas, we have snapper, we have crawfish, we have grouper, we have all of these different species within our seas, and we have not looked at a way to move them from the sea, not just at the fish market, which is great, we can go there and get them, but also to the point of agri-processing, where we are able to put them on a can. And you know what? I would faster buy a can of a snapper to have a snapper sandwich than I probably would a tuna. I'd probably forget what tuna was about. But these things, we're so used to doing what we do that we don't think about the fact that we have the capacity to do it as well. So all of that is a part of the blue economy, but it also cross-references with the agricultural industry. But then there's also, like I talked about, the ecotourism and marine research and making this country known for research in marine biology. But I'll take a pause there because I can go on and on and on.
Well, I will definitely say that the insight has been wonderful. I I'm reading some of the comments and there are a few things that I was writing, some things that just came to me. Joseph and Dion, I'm about to come to you to give any feedback on any of those points. But it makes me think, is our goal even progressing right now, or are we just sort of managing? And if this is managing, we have a problem. So are we progressing or are we existing? And then when you talk about economic diversification, which is something that we all know is so important, this brings such clarity to the way in which those things can be done. And truly, when we look at what it means to lead and live a successful life as a Bahamian, if we have a one-track economy, then there's a one-track path for Bahamian people to be successful. And that may explain why some people are not being successful, because some people just are not able to prosper and to get ahead in life by adhering to the status quo and the one way of doing it, which is going to school and doing well, maybe going to college and doing well, and then coming back and finding a job. And even for people who have been able to circumvent that process, it's tremendously more difficult to be successful in non-traditional ways, which is the majority of other ways other than that straightforward path, than it is to for people to be able to find success in a variety of industries, in a variety of ways, through a variety of paths of career choices, of school choices, of entrepreneurship. All of these different things fall into this conversation. And I do have a great appreciation for the underlying environmental theme. As an environmentalist myself, there were certainly a number of very pertinent points. I'm looking at it from island to island and almost assigning this main industry and then sub industries is certainly something that it feels unheard of, and that is not a good thing. But Joseph, Dion, I don't know if you have any comments or any questions at this point. I'm going to look at a few of the comments as you do that.
You know, I'm gonna jump in here, Ms. Komolafe, Mrs. Komolafe. I appreciate that you highlighted agriculture a number of times, so I can tell that it's a passion of yours, and I personally appreciate that being my field of profession, love, and everything. I'm just saying I'm an anecdotal kind of person, and a friend of mine, I stopped by a buddy of mine last week Friday, and he asked me, said, most people call me Gibby. He said, Gibby, you're 32. The average person your age wasn't interested in agriculture, got into it. How did I get into it? I fell in love with agriculture at the age of 16. Not because apparently my family was in agriculture 50, 60, 100 years ago, but I didn't know anything about that. I grew up around businessmen. But I fell in love with it because in wanting to be a vet, I saw a need going to the Gladstone Road Agriculture Center with a vet and went to the piggery to inject some pigs, and I encountered animals that were twice my size. And he told me I must inject them, and I realized they got teeth the size of my finger. But that's a little comic relief. But when I look at agriculture, agritourism, ecotourism, maritime or mariculture, however you want to put all these different terminologies that we have nowadays, I know that we all know that we have been exporting fish and fishery goods, and I'm gonna jump around. That's just kind of my way of doing things. But when you spoke about eating canned snapper, and I'm not knocking you, but I have a friend who said, look at a fish like turbot or triggerfish. When we buy them, when we cook, if we catch them or whatever, we always mince them, just like you do like canned tuna. Snapper may not necessarily be what you would eat on the can, but we got a bunch of triggerfish around here. Queen trigger, which we call turbot, ocean tally, which is the big gray one. All of them, we could be canning these. We could have, like you said, not necessarily a snapper sandwich, but a triggerfish sandwich. You make a salad just like you do it. We have, all of us, a lot of us probably have family members who, when they catch a wahoo, we break it down and make a salad with it, or smoked wahoo, or a smoked fish dip. We should be known for these things. So I can appreciate, I encourage that 100%. As an agriculturalist, a sustainable agriculturalist, I also do beekeeping. I deal with produce. I deal with livestock. I've always, and I'm going to share this publicly, and my dad is watching. He's probably gonna rob me for this, but I have a dream of coming up with a Bahamian mayonnaise with locally raised chickens, because mayonnaise is oil and egg whites. Those are the main ingredients, not the only ingredients, but the main ingredients. And my dream is to have my own mayonnaise with eggs from my farm and coconut oil. And if it can't be coconut oil, because I've done some research and you have to add a little bit to coconut oil to make it happen. But if those are the two main, why can't we do this? We grow tomatoes. Why can't we have ketchup? Why can't mustard trees grow in the Bahamas? We could have Bahamian mustard, And so when you talk about these agri-businesses, agri-processing, I have a friend who I wish I had told her to tune in, but she has roots in Eluta where I live now. I have roots there too, but she makes tart like her grand aunts, a 5-generation pineapple and coconut tart recipe. I'm a relative to the Mortimers, not through the Mortimer family, but that is a Bahamian legacy. We should be able to push them, which is one of probably about couple hundred or couple thousand factories, candy factories in the world that still make candy the way that they do. And Mortimer candy is still a very unique taste. The story of our church candy and the wax paper, that they did it with wax paper so you don't make noise when you go to church, that is a selling point. These are things that we must look at and push as a people. When you talk about fisheries, I have a cousin, he's a fisherman from Grand Bahama. He has never sold his fish locally. He sells exclusively the red lobster. Okay? Now, when you talk about farming certain type of fish, that's a whole nother can of worms, and Stefan and Joseph know that is my favorite topic, but I also think that there's a bit more research to do. But I think about our mangroves. I look at Jamaica. Jamaica was a sun, sand, and sea place too, till they started eating all the parrotfish and they realized parrotfish make sand, right? We don't eat parrotfish, so thankfully we still got a lot of sand. But Jamaica got lakes and lagoons and stuff like that. We got them too. Jamaica went from simply sun, sand, and sea, tropical paradise to an ecological. Marijuana was a big part of it, right? And I personally think we are behind the 8 ball in the marijuana business, but we still can catch up if we want to. I'm not a smoker of marijuana, but I think that it's an industry, whether recreational or medical. And, you know, and this is economic diversity. I'm going in my ecological agricultural profession at this point. But I remember, and I'm going to quote this person, and y'all don't hold this against me, but Graham Weatherford mentioned the government acquired that hotel in Grand Bahama, turned that into one of the largest hospitals in the region on the water. And we use our Bahamian professionals, and if we have to recruit, hire foreign professionals and train Bahamians, how much hospitals on the water? We could create something. I mean, our medical tourism, and you know, I'm out of the box. I'm unorthodox, but very orthodox in some ways. But, you know, there's a person who in court right now, so I won't call their name, but they talk about bringing stem cell research to the Bahamas. And we had the opportunity to be the Western Hemisphere's leader in stem cell research. Okay, so let's be real. We have had opportunity upon opportunity, but we still relying on sun, sand, and sea. I have an old teacher who told me Germany got sun, sand, and sea. Spain got sun, sand, and sea. Mrs. Komolafe spoke about the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. Let's remember now, the Great Barrier Reef is dying, eh? And there's a coral disease that is traveling around the world that has not reached us yet, but it's down there in Australia. So we need to exploit the fact that we ain't start drilling for oil, and I'm not a proponent of it. You know, I believe in a sovereign wealth fund, but we got a Reaganite. You know, I could bring this up. My family and friends always tell me, Dion, you have brilliant ideas. Don't give them to everyone. But I don't care. I'm a nationalist. I care about my country. And my thing is, we got more sand than most people in the world. We could dig up a beach, go out in the water and dig it up, and tomorrow you could dig up another 50,000 tons. Why we ain't making glass, people? Why we ain't making glass? We can, you know how easy it is to make glass? As simple as putting some rods in the sand during a lightning storm, or you take it and you pressurize it and make glass. All these, how much are people who come in, they got hurricane-proof glass windows? Why that is not made in the Bahamas? Let's be real, man. That's, you know, and so Mrs. Komolafe, I appreciate your insight, your thoughts, and I think that we really need to have a national discussion on these things. And this is my first time ever interacting with you. I've admired your speech and your poise and the ideas and concepts you bring forth. But these are the ideas and things we need to think about and talk about. And in terms of expanding things, my passion is livestock farming. We could be producing 90% of our meat. We can, but we have to change the meat that we eat. We ain't got to eat Wagyu beef, man. We create that Jonkanu ham like I talked about the last time we spoke, but I can always bring up my Jonkanu ham. My Jonkanu ham is a pig raised in a mango orchard off of nothing but fallen mangoes. And when mango ain't in season, you feed them something else. But we have to be able to create. But I can go back. I can be political, and I can be slightly disgusting to my forefathers. We have ruined this thing because we taught servitude, okay? And we taught servitude not only in tourism, we taught servitude in agriculture because we taught our people, oh, you can only be a farmhand. And when I go and meet with older farmers, they talk to me bad. We taught servitude in the financial services, which I'm sure Mrs. Komolafe, you can attest to when you were a younger person in that field. We taught it in our retail industry. So, but we have to teach ownership. And in conversation, I had no earlier than today, we must realize the government is not there to provide for you, but the government is to facilitate. And until we remove them puppets behind the government, which is just around the world, remember I tell you, I got Cuban training, eh? So y'all who understand what I'm saying. But until we remove those puppets, and we as the people, the private sector, and the politicians who are genuine, bring everything together, and we can move together as a people, not a government, not a party, not this faction of people, but a people, a general populace. That's when we can move forward, man, environmentally, because we got to care about the environment. We don't care about the environment ain't gonna take care of us, eh? Mother Nature will always survive. We as humans will disappear at some point if we don't take care of it. Thank you very much.
So I just have 2 points, but one is a point and one is a question to Mrs. Komolafe. I want to touch back on the use of marijuana and your position on it, but I also want to talk about some of the things that you mentioned. I think are brilliant ideas, and I'm kind of upset because I'm a bit disalarmed because I had a lot of questions for you, but you really were on point with your statements. And so one of the things that I have a fear that has happened, time and time again, is that we have these brilliant ideas, and then when you look, it's not a Bahamian name that's doing it. The execution is never a Bahamian. It's always, I was about to be real shady just then. It's always some non-Bahamian name. And so I've heard, especially when it comes to the concept of the legalization of marijuana, there's always this big, great fear that there's going to be a foreign face of that particular industry. And so I guess the 2 questions I have for you would be, number one, what is your position on the legalization of marijuana? And the second would be, when you mentioned the things like the creatives, that was really important for me because I consider myself a secret creative. I think that that's not something that we put a lot of emphasis on in the Bahamas, especially when it comes to young people. It's sort of dismissed and dashed away. But how do we ensure that when these things come onto stream, that it's by Bahamians for Bahamians? Because that's like I said, time and time again, when you look, it's always some. Even in the tourism industry, when you look at it, a lot of the Bahamians are the servers. A lot of Bahamians are the maids. Likewise, I'm in banking, and so a lot of the Bahamians are the line staff. But when you get high up the rank, the skin tone gets a bit lighter. And so my question to you is, how do we go about ensuring that this country is for us, so that when we create these industries and we start to diversify the economy, that Bahamians benefit first?
Very good questions. So the second one is going to be a bit longer, so I'll deal with the first one. So the DNA was the first organization to really put this issue of marijuana on the table, because there are a lot of persons in the community, some young men, that probably take a joint here and there. And we realized that quite a bit of them were being penalized before the courts for it. And so the policy that the party had was a decriminalization of marijuana, which is not legalization. It was just seeking out a lesser penalty for persons who were caught with small quantities. We have never put a position out on recreational marijuana. We have not endorsed that, but we have also spoken to the fact that we would explore the benefits of medicinal marijuana. And we've been waiting on the report coming from the Marijuana Commission in that regard. We've started to read it because it was leaked. So we've been able to get some information on it. But we certainly support the exploration of medicinal marijuana in a careful way, and the decriminalization, which effectively is lesser penalties for persons caught with small amounts. But we have not endorsed or put forward a position on recreational marijuana for use here in the Bahamas. Now, moving to your point to ownership, and what do these industries look like in terms of ownership? Who's behind these industries? I always say to people, I think about the 1967 era when that government rose to power. They brought about, in my opinion, and I think a lot of people would not disagree with me, they brought about the greatest socioeconomic revolution in the history of this nation. back in that period from 1967, certainly to 1977. And they built the foundation for the modern Bahamas that we now benefit from. But and yes, you're correct. They were right. As Gibson would have said, we've built a economy on servitude. It's a service-based economy, and we're the servants, right? Whereas everybody in the number one and the number two industry are the owners. And this is actually one of the reasons why I left the financial services industry. I'll tell you why. At the time when I left, I was working in wealth management. And I was working in a department where the wealthiest of the world park their funds in companies and trusts and foundations. And you're dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars in a family for centuries. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I'm sitting inside this bank and we're managing these funds and administering these entities that are holding these funds. And my people can't even save $5,000 in their bank account. And that disturbed me greatly. And I wanted to move to a point where we can get our people to have generational wealth. And I knew that I could not achieve that making my good money, because I was making some good money in the financial services industry, but I would have only been enriching myself if I had stayed in that industry. And I probably would have had, I mean, not that I'm hurting for anything, but I certainly would have had the best of the best in life, whatever I would have wanted, because I'm an achiever. But I decided to make the sacrifice to leave because I wanted to move my people to a point of ownership. And Gibson talked about ownership, and earlier Evans talked about inclusion, and which is why I'm here on this platform now, because of that whole mindset and principle of inclusion. And you're speaking about the ownership again. And the way I see the way forward and the path forward for the Bahamas is access, inclusion, and ownership for the Bahamian people. Why I reference 1967 is because that era is because that was the building stone. That was the building foundation for us to get to where we are. Gibson mentioned it hundreds of years ago. His people were farmers. Well, a lot of our people were farmers because we were a plantation back then, right? That's why the Europeans brought us here to farm the land for the benefit of their economies. And then our grandparents moved into servanthood, where they became butlers and maids and everything. And then we had the benefit. I always say my grandmother was a maid. She was a maid up to the point of her retirement. But the family that she raised, one of the sons in the family that she raised, I ended up in law school with that son. So it shows where we moved from one generation to the next generation. The Bahamas is still a young nation, and I believe we could have been further than we are, but we must never forget the fact still that we're still a young nation. The next dispensation, though, because we talk about coming out of bondage back in 1967, but even if we liken our story to that of the children of Israel in the Bible, where they came out of Egypt, the fact of the matter is their destination was not to stay in the wilderness, which is where we are right now, wandering around in the wilderness. Their destination was to get to the promised land. And when they got to the promised land, they were supposed to own that land. They were supposed to farm that land. If you recall, in the wilderness, they got manna every day. Every day they got manna and they got water from the rock. Of course, Moses couldn't even get into the promised land because he had to strike the rock. But when they got to the land, you know what the Lord told them? As soon as they touched the produce of the land, the manna stopped. They had to start working the land for themselves. And this is where we are. Tourism has been that manna for us, right? And it's been feeding us all of these years. But it has been feeding us in a way where other persons have owned it. When I was at the Bahamas Development Bank, and again, this was a conversation that I had with the former Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance. I don't have a problem with breezes. I don't have a problem with sandals. But I look at it and I said, breezes is a chain and sandals is a chain. And the Bahamas is the leader in tourism in the region, and we have no chain, nowhere throughout the CARICOM Islands, nowhere. And that is unacceptable. And so when I think about all of these plans, the orange economy and the blue economy, and moving to agri-processing and the creative industry, I'm thinking solely, first and foremost, about Bahamian ownership. It could be no other way, because that is how you get to the point of developing your people from a socio-economic standpoint. And with that, I wanted to touch on, because we talked about, see, those industries and moving toward those industries, they're the output. That's where I see the end goal, that we have those industries and they're diversifying the economy, but there must be an input to get us to that point. And to your question, the input from an economic level has to be the environment that is created by the government for people to be able to prosper. That's going to entail economic reform, and I touched on it earlier, and looking at these heads of agreements where we're not just signing off everything, signing off land, I mean, literally selling land, and all we're getting is some jobs in return. And when the going gets tough, they pick up and they go. Those those heads of agreements need to have residual benefits where they are contributing to the development of this nation. And I speak about this fund, setting up this fund, and it's just geared toward development for our youth in sports, in education, and in culture, and so on and so forth. But also where we have those spin-off effects that I talk about in the producing sector. And we look at tax reform. Value-added tax is killing our people. They talk about the fact that our people can't save, right? Well, how can you save when you, and by the way, they say we're the third richest country in the world. That's skewed because there are a lot of people there making 6 figures and 7 figures, and so it's skewed. But it is difficult to live here in this country, to pay your light bill, to pay your water bill, to feed your children, to keep food on the table, and be able to save, as well as be able to even purchase property. And you know what I found when I was walking around in 2017? I was shocked to find the amount of young people and professionals who were still living with their parents. Why are they living there? Because they cannot afford land, right? So in this whole economic reform, we talk about looking at those heads of agreements. We talk about revising the tax policy and making it more equitable and more progressive, where those who have more are paying more, and those who are vulnerable are not disadvantaged. And those same companies that I was managing that are not taxed in the financial services industry should be taxed. And it's not as if the industry did not recommend it. The government just refused to move forward with the recommendations. And all of that factored into us not being blacklisted and not being seen as a tax haven, as I touched on earlier, but as a bona fide international financial center. But it is the lack of political will and the puppets that are behind the politicians that have been running this nation, at least for the last 2 to 3 decades. And we also talk about land reform and that economic development, because to your question about ownership, well, in order for people, you know, the factors of production, it is land, it is capital, it is land, it is capital. You need access to capital, which is a challenge for a lot of persons right now. And in that, we talk about we talked about the exchange, the central bank of the Bahamas, and the discount rate, and being able to move exchange controls, one, but also bringing the cost of capital down. Right now, the discount rate, I think, is at maybe 4%, and the prime rate is just above that. And what these banks do, if you go to get a loan for a business, you can get a loan for a car, you get a loan for vacation, you get a loan for furniture. But if you want to get a loan for a business, you need to give your land, your granddaddy land, your this land. That's assuming that you have land, right? And then you're going to pay these high figures for the loan, somewhere up to 15, 18%, right? Because they are very risky loans. And even though they are highly secured, they still charge you these high rates. So we need to bring the cost of capital down, and we need to make capital more accessible. But one of the main things that people do not have access to is access to land. And we talked about the land reform. And there are so many agriculturalists who are trying to get access to land. There's so many business owners who are trying to get access to land. They may have the capital to be able to develop their business, but they don't have the land to be able to house the business. But of course, I mean, a lot of that is changing in the digital era that we're living in, and with e-commerce and with and us transitioning now to a digital platform. But there's still a need for persons to be able to have land as one of the greatest resources. And so we talked about the whole reform of the Crown land, which is now in the office of the Prime Minister. And we speak about a land bureau where we take an audit of all the land across the archipelago and we put it inside a vehicle, and we zone each of those lands for agricultural purposes, for business development purposes, for residential purposes. and we allow Bahamians to be able to access them, whether by purchase or whether by lease, to be able to develop their businesses or to be able to build their homes, but at very low rates. And this will be in conjunction with the Bahamas Mortgage Corporation, at very low rates and an affordable capital. So those are things that are very key and very important in terms of moving toward the ownership. I see Evans, you're coming in, moving toward ownership. We have to make these things accessible to Bahamians.
Well, certainly, I think that everything that you have said is powerful. We have a brief topic that we want to discuss as we move toward the end of this broadcast, and this is one of the things that I wish could go on a little longer, because I'm certainly feeding off of the energy of people on Facebook, trying not to jump out of my seat. And so I know people will talk about the fact that it's one thing to be able to put a lot of plans forward, but you spoke about like a land bureau, for example. Very briefly, because I don't want to use the remainder of the time on this, but are there any other key system shifts in our structure of government that you think will bolster this sort of change? Because we know that the most that we have seen in many years, but certainly in recent years, is that as the baton has passed from one party to the next, you may have the renaming of some ministries and the moving around of some people based on political affiliation and things like that. But do you have any key changes to the structure of the public service, maybe, or of governance in general, that you think will be needed in order to actually see a lot of the things that we've been talking about happen?
Absolutely. So there are two things I want to touch on. I'll touch on the governance reform and the good governance agenda that we have, and I'll touch on education. So in the governance reform, we talked about, it's a whole good governance platform where we talk about transparency and accountability and bringing forward these progressive legislation that have been dragging their feet. Yes, some persons have been talking about it, but the only way you would know if we're going to do it is if you give us the opportunity. The others have been there and have not done it. So we talk about campaign finance reform, which is something that we're very much committed to because it levels the playing field in the political arena. We talk about the Freedom of Information Act, which we would fully bring to force. We also talk about the Integrity Bill and the Office of the Ombudsman. And we have a very extensive constitutional reform agenda. Some of it is relative to immigration, but we also are looking at a whole system change, a whole political system change, removing the Queen as head of state, removing the Queen as monarch, and moving toward a republic, okay? Because we believe in the decentralization of government power. I do not believe in government and in everything being centralized in government. This is why we have the problem today. The islands throughout the archipelago of the Bahamas, because of our unique makeup, our people should be able to maintain and manage their own destinies. So even if we look at zoning the Bahamas, where there's a council for the South, a council for the North, and centrally, where a lot of the tax dollars that are recouped, that are made by these islands, can be recouped for their own development. I traveled to Exuma earlier this year, and I went to Bimini, and I was amazed to see the conditions of the roads. I was amazed to see the airports. And I know if those islands had more responsibility for their infrastructure, and if they had more control over the revenue that they were getting, there is no way that they would allow those islands to deteriorate in the manner that they are deteriorating. And so moving toward a republic, practicing strongly into the decentralization of government power, which is something that I am extremely, I probably mentioned a lot of passions, but there's a lot of things that's going to be going on. Then there's education. To get us to this point, I talk about the diversification being the output. Education is going to be at the heart of that. We have for years, and I spent 12 years in public schooling, so I know this firsthand. We tried to put everybody in the same box. We have a one-size-fits-all approach. And you heard Lewis talk about the fact that we don't give creatives an opportunity because we frowned upon it. We told everybody to go to school, get A's and B's, and then go become lawyers and doctors and get your good government job. But the world is changing, and we cannot continue on in this vein. And the education platform that we have can be just summarized into an acronym called ACTS, where we are focusing is 4 A's, is 2 C's, is a T, a E, and an S. We're focusing on academics. And so if you want a professional career in academics, go for gold. Athletics, if you want to be a professional athlete, go on. Arts, which is really tapping into the creative development of our young people, and agriculture, introducing our young people to agriculture at the earliest opportunity so we can stop this lie that Bahamians do not want to be agriculturalists and they do not want to be farmers. I went to school in England, and being a farmer is on the same level as being a barrister in England, and they are millionaires there. Farmers are highly respected in Europe, highly respected, and we can do the same thing here. And then we talk about character development, which is very key for any society. Chess is something that is major because we have found that it helps to improve math and science grades, and it also helps our children with strategy. And technology is the T in acts, and entrepreneurship, and Gibson mentioned it earlier, teaching our young people or teaching people about entrepreneurship. Well, the best way to do that is to do that from an early opportunity. So you're already teaching your young people to be owners and not servants by these things, and you're already giving them an opportunity to excel outside of just academics. And then the S in acts speaks to the Learn to Swim program, wherein we live in an archipelago, but the vast majority of Bahamians cannot swim. And the best way to get people over their fear of water is to start them from an early age. And so these are the things that are going to be the foundation of this whole new Bahamas that we continue to talk about, the 21st century Bahamas, a whole change, socio-economic and political change. This is the revolution that we're talking about in the DNA. This is the conversation that we have not been having for years. And this is why we know we're speaking to this generation, because the only way that we are going to be able to get ourselves to this point is if we buy into this message and understand that we can be great, that we are a great nation, and we should have a larger voice and a larger platform on the regional and the international stage.
Wow. Wow. So thank goodness I am a writer. I find myself trying to contain myself because beyond just hearing good ideas, this should send chills down the spine of any Bahamian that wants to see progress in this nation. And the reason is because I thought about throwing that question out there, and I'm so glad that I decided to still ask, because we have to acknowledge that we cannot progress into new arenas with the same system that has always existed. And so to know that has been so thought out, and as a member, well, a relatively newer member of the team over at the Organization of Responsible Governance, which I know you have done some work in the past with as well.
Yes.
We have been also pushing for several of the policy moves that you were speaking about and the constitutional changes that will actually put us in position to do the things that we're talking about. Because quite frankly, if we were able to make these big strides in the way that our economy is structured under the system that we have now, we could assume that it would have already been done. And so we need to be talking at this level, not just having the great ideas, but talking about the ways in which the system needs to change. As we move toward the end, and I wish we could spend more time talking about plans and strategies, because I know that for every Bahamian, everyone who is here, just hearing something tangible is such a breath of fresh air, because we've been lacking that and we need it now more than ever. But I certainly wanted to talk about, I guess, what some would consider the elephant in the room, and we have to address it. So the question that I know that you have gotten on several occasions, but I must open up for discussion is the Bahamas ready for a female prime minister? Is the Bahamas ready for a new party? We know that there are some cultural barriers that have existed for maintaining being politically correct. There are cultural barriers that are unnecessary that have existed. But are we ready for that? I want to send that over to you first, Mrs. Komolafe, but I certainly want to allow Joseph and Dion to comment on the need for being ready to do what is required, or even do the social infrastructures exist to allow people to think independently? Because I don't want to push anyone in any particular direction. None of what I do is politically driven, but I truly believe in my heart that we should be taught to think independently enough to be able to make the right decision that will push us toward the future. So are we ready?
Absolutely. So very good questions. First, where we are, it's just obvious that I'm a female and I make no apologies for that. That just happens to be the case. I've been that way for 40 plus years now. Glad to be there. You know, the Bahamas is ready for competent leadership, and the Bahamas is ready for visionary leadership. And I believe I represent both of those things, competency as well as visionary leadership. When I think about this question and persons ask this questions, you're right. There are some who are of an older generation who hold fast to some of these very archaic views about women in leadership. And then there are also some who are, I would like to say, on the religious right-wing side of things, who have interpreted the Bible in a particular way, speaking about the headship of man versus woman. In my opinion, taken out of context. I'm a married woman and I recognize my husband as the head of the home and the priest of the home. That's separate and apart from how we function outside of the marriage covenant, you know, which is a covenant within the church. When I also reflect upon the fact that the Bahamas has had women leadership in all aspects of government. There are three branches of government. There's the judiciary, the legislature, as well as the executive. In the legislature, we have had a female speaker in the House of Assembly. The first was Romitalia Johnson. And in the Senate, we have had a president. We've had multiple presidents. The first was Dame Doris Johnson. Since then, we have had Lynn Holler Wesco. We have had Lady Sharon Wilson. We have Kate Forbes, who just stepped down, and now Dr. Why is her mind escaping me now? Campbell? No, I can't remember right now. It'll come back to me. But there's a sitting president of the Senate, now, Mildred Hall Watson. I'm sorry, there's no way I could forget her name. And in the judiciary, we have had two female chief justices. We've had Dame Joan Sawyer, who was the first, and we've had Dame Anita Allen, who would have come afterwards. We've only not just taken leadership inside the executive, which is the cabinet, right? And here we have this opportunity as the first female leader of a major political party. And we are now at the precipice of the paradigm shift in this country. We believe that people are ready at this time now. One, because our message is right. And we're speaking to a new generation of Bahamians and an existing generation, an older generation of Bahamians who have a new mindset and a fresh mindset. So that is the first thing. The second thing is that there is a high level of apathy toward the other two major parties, simply because we've been sold promises and lies for so long. I would like to say that the Bahamian people are hashtag woke. Like, they get it now. They understand that this is a systematic, something that is systemic and systematic, and it's structural in nature, where the system is set against us. And nobody is speaking about these progressive ideas and reforms that we're talking about that is actually unleashing the opportunity of access and inclusion and ownership for the Bahamian people. And finally, when I think about this whole topic, the Bahamas is not, I don't think the people of the Bahamas are behind the people of Turks and Caicos, who have moved forward for the female premier, Jamaica, who has voted a woman to the office of prime minister twice, in Portia Simpson Miller, in Trinidad, where they had Kamala Bissad-Bissessere, in Dominica, that led the Caribbean with Eugenia Childs. So I don't think, and even up in Bermuda, right? I don't think that the mindsets of the Bahamian people are so archaic that they cannot be open to a female leader. And I'll tell you what I'm finding when I'm on the ground. Young people who make up the majority of the voting bloc. Do you know that 20% of the voting population is 60 plus, right? That's the generation of Dr. Minnis and the generation of Brave Davis. right? 20% in a three-way race, in a bona fide three-way race cannot win you the government, right? So, and all of those persons are not going to vote either PLP or FNM. Those guys, if they were working in the private sector, they would be retired by now, because the age of retirement is 65, right? And early retirement is 60. And both of them, one is going to be 70 plus and the other is going to be 69 when the next general election comes around. So the point that I'm trying to make is the persons in that voting bloc that have a hang up against female leadership is very small and will have a minimal impact on the general elections and the results. The vast majority of the voters are young and they are female. Women make up the largest proportion, and young people. And the young people do not have this mindset. They're not looking at gender. They're looking at competency and they're looking at vision. Is this person speaking my language to take me to where I need to be, where I can feel like I'm a first-class Bahamian, a first-class citizen in my country? And after all, that's why I stay at home, or that's why I'm still home, so I can be first class. So I certainly believe, and then looking at the Democratic National Alliance, as again, we don't have the challenges that the other two organizations have, which is a tarnished brand. This is a new, fresh organization that is a vehicle of change. And we like to focus on that third word in our name, alliance, Democratic National Alliance. Because in our ranks, you will find persons who were former PLPs and former FNMs and independents who are both dissatisfied with the status quo and are looking for a vehicle where they can come to and be attracted to, who can bring about the dreams, you know, moving their dreams to reality and moving this Bahamas into the 21st century where it needs to be. And so I certainly believe that the people are ready for my leadership, which again, as I said, I just happen to be a female and youthful, but also under the banner of the DNA, considering where we are now as a nation at this point in time.
Once again, powerful. Dion, you wanna chime in there real quick?
You know, I'm gonna let Joseph go first this time because I'm swallowing all of that. You know, I'm gonna let Joseph go first.
Go ahead, Joseph.
Okay, so Ms. Komolafe, you said a lot of things that I want to hear, and I guess one of the questions that I did have for you is in terms of the other members of the DNA. I as a current, and I'll be completely frank with you, I don't know who they are. So I'm coming to ask, who are the other candidates, and how do you go about choosing? I mean, if you've selected them already, what was that process like? If you haven't done so, is it that you come to you and say, I want to be a DNA representative, or is it that you will go there and you will select your members?
Very good question. I'm so glad you asked that. I got the opportunity to mention that. So again, it's a new and a 21st century, it's a party with a new mindset, 21st century mindset. We are proud of the fact that we're the only political party. We've put out a call to action for persons to come and join the DNA. Persons who want to be run for office, who want to be parliamentarians, cabinet ministers, ambassadors, board members. We have put out a call to action in a little ad. It's about a little over 2 minutes. We've had it circulating on social media now for the past several months. But even prior to that, we have launched an application process via our website on mydnaparty.org, where persons who want to vie for candidacy apply via this portal. And I'm glad that you asked about the process because it's something that we take very serious, putting this team together. And all this year, as a matter of fact, I've been talking and speaking to persons recruiting candidates now for the last 2 years, actively, very much for the last year. Some people take a little bit longer than others, right? But the process is, once you would have made application, you are invited to an interview before our executive council, which serves as the candidates committee of the DNA. Inside that council, you would have the leader, the deputy, the national chairman, vice chairs, and other operational arms like the Department of Treasury, administration, and so on and so forth. They are asked a series of questions, and you know, why they want to run, why the DNA, what are their plans for the constituency of choice, which we invite them on the application to put 3 choices there on the application. If they pass through that process, which at the same time, there is a vetting going on, because in the application process, we ask for a police certificate, but we also do a background vetting through the Criminal Records Office Department to ensure that there's nothing that we missed. And so in that first stage, there is a background vetting that is going on. If they pass through by a unanimous vote at the candidates committee, they move on to the second stage, which is the Central Congress, which is the ratifying body within the party. The candidates committee can only recommend candidates, but the Congress will ratify the particular candidate. If the individual and that body has more persons in it outside of everybody who's on the candidates committee is in that body, but there are also other persons who form that body too, officers in the various constituencies of the party. They then, if they pass through that process on a unanimous vote, then they are provisionally ratified, where they would go on a 3-month probationary period. And they have to go on the ground, they have to get a minimum of 500 signatures in the constituency of choice, and demonstrate that persons would be willing to support their candidacy. They're going to have to satisfy certain other criteria. And while they are on that probationary period, a further vetting process is going to be carried out. We're going to be searching the public records to ensure that they do not have outstanding debt. We're going to be going into their communities to find out how people feel about them, what they feel about them. We're also going to be seeking character references and financial references and so on and so forth. Now, if there is an instance where we have more than one candidate vying for a particular seat, we allow the persons, I mean, we may direct them in another constituency if we feel they would be a better fit there. But if they are intent on being in the constituency where they are, then they are made aware of the fact that there could be a runoff between them and the other individual or the 2 individuals. And the constituents would get to contribute to this process via a debate, watching a debate between the 2 candidates and choosing between them, in addition to the leadership and the requirements that we would have. And so you could find, we have been interviewing candidates. So we have a first batch that's getting ready to come out, our first set of candidates. And you may find that there may be some candidates, more than one candidate in a particular constituency. And that is because we want to allow the democratic process to play itself out as best as possible. But as I said, we can also have a conversation recommending persons to go to their second choice. If their first choice is has 1 or 2 other persons, just looking at, in the interest of time and getting persons on the ground, because people are eager to know who our candidates are. We want people to get to know who our candidates are. We don't want to put them on the ground 2 weeks, 3 months before the general elections. We want them in there working. And if the people do not want them, we want them to come back and tell us they don't want them. Now, not 2 or 3 people, we're talking about a constituency of 5,000 persons. It has to be a substantial amount of people. And there has to be a substantive reason why you would not want this individual. But yes, that's where we are. We're very excited. So you can visit our Facebook page. It's actually on our website now, My DNA Party, that call to action that I speak about. And you can also access an application through the website as well.
I have one quick question I want to ask. Sorry, just one other question I want to ask. Mrs. Komolafe, would you consider doing a debate against the other 2 leaders of the party, of the bigger party? Well, big parties, not bigger rather, but the big parties, because I would love to hear the responses of the other 2 up against you. That would be really interesting to see. So is that something that you would consider doing, having a debate with both?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would push for it. And obviously that's something that you expect in a republic style government as well. You know, I don't know that they will accept to it, which is unfortunate. And you know, Jamaica is having its elections, it's an elections process right now, and they just had a debate. And that's very progressive. You know, I think it bodes well. I mentioned the fact earlier that I used to write an article in the Nassau Guardian. And one of those articles I wrote was another general election without substance. And I was very disappointed because we live in a culture where we can lay a manifesto out and unveil it 2 days, 1 week, 1 month before the election. Nobody speaks about it. And so it's no wonder we get upset. The people get upset after the election where they're asking for certain things and they don't come to pass. That's because you didn't give your leaders an opportunity to speak about these issues, to be questioned on these issues, to have them actually articulate it, because you can write a lot of things down on paper, but if you don't understand it and if you can't articulate it, it's going to be very difficult for you to implement it. And so certainly I operate under that spirit, that as transparent as we can be ahead of the general elections, and give our people the benefit of the doubt to be able to make a decision, not just based on personalities or the hysteria or the, you know, all of the hype that is around a rally. I would support that 100%.
Well, wow, I'm still I'm still processing all of the information, because I feel like progressive thinking is not only what we need, but I feel we often discredit Bahamian people. Like, and I'll just say it, we ain't stupid. We ain't dumb.
Exactly.
We know what we need. We understand that there are problems that need solving. Everybody may not have all of the answers. Different people from different backgrounds may speak different ways, may be into different things. But at the end of the day, we want to secure a future for ourselves, for our families. We want to make it out of this COVID-19 situation, for example, where in a state that the state of our economy doesn't have a worse impact than the disease itself. We want to move forward and we want to progress. And so hearing all of these things is so inspiring. And like I said, it's a breath of fresh air to think about these things. I know that we have put out, as we really move toward a close, for anyone that has any questions to share them as we begin to wind down. But I do want to highlight something based off of a lot of the structure that you would have shared with us. It is clear, it is obvious from my professional opinion, now working in the space of governance and responsibility in governance, that all of these measures have been taken into account. When you look at the democratic process and how that will clearly play a role in the candidates that the DNA puts forth for the next general election, I think that is so important, because what you're doing is almost restoring the integrity to these offices that has seemed to have departed. When people can agree on who they want to lead them beyond just checking a box based on who is there, and there are preliminary ways for people to begin to engage with and consider who they want to lead. When you do that level of background checking and validation of people's credentials and the financial parts of things that are absolutely important, it shows that there's a level of accountability and transparency that is being taken into consideration even before the election, which is so very important, that we're engaged in the process 24/7 all the time, whether it's election season or not. What I want to encourage people to continue to think about is the fact that we need to think of structures that we can put in place to ensure that we are considered first-class citizens. And that's another one of those phrases that has just sent chills down my spine. And when you hear plans and strategies like these that are tangible and that give clear pathways into Bahamian citizens being treated as first-class citizens in their own country, those are the sorts of things that, no matter what our political persuasion or affiliations are, that we should be pressing to be in place to govern every party, to govern every leadership, to govern every body, no matter who it is. We have to get to a place where we are no longer afraid to call for higher standards of governance. I don't know if we have any questions at this point, and I do want to give Ms. Komolafe and all of the panelists, in addition to give any final remarks. Let me just quickly check, and I see several comments. And clearly there's a great support base for a lot of the things that are being discussed. But Ms. Komolafe, I don't know if you have in light of all the things that, well, as a matter of fact, I want to go to our panelists first because I want to give you the final word. But in light of all of what we've been talking about, the center of which is the plan for the way forward for the Bahamian people. Joseph, Dion, what are some of the things? Oh, I see we have a question, but the question will be for you. What are some of the things that we must put at the forefront of our minds, and we must demand, and we must look toward and look for as we move forward? I'm told that we have a question. Stephen, if you could send that over to me real quick while we gather our thoughts for our final remarks. I'm not sure if it's Zoom or if it's
Okay, I think Giovanni, his hands is raised. Giovanni, you want to go ahead and unmute your mic and perhaps ask the question?
Hi, good night. Can you hear me?
Yes.
yes. You can go ahead.
Yeah. Good night, everybody. It's a great discussion by all of the panelists. I have a question from Komolafe specifically. I just want to say first and foremost, I'm a huge fan. You know, I love the ideas that you brought forth, mainly about technology and science, specifically computer science and marine science. I think it's disappointing because it's 2020 and
Yes.
there's so much of a focus. There's not so much of a focus for the ideas we brought forward, but it's extremely refreshing to know that there's someone in a leadership position that has so much 21st century solutions. Before I ask my question, I just want to give a bit of a background. If anyone is not familiar with Kirsty Powell, she held senior positions at Google and Goldman Sachs, and at a tech summit in Grand Bahama a few years ago, she gave a brief synopsis of how she offered many solutions to government officials only to be faced with frustration. So, and the Bahamian tech community, local and international, face similar circumstances. So, I guess my question is, if technology is the future, how do you plan to ensure Bahamian technologists who are extremely qualified in many of the technologies seen at companies like Google and Facebook, Microsoft, which are changing the world, to want to build our technological infrastructure?
A very good question. And a person like me, why technology is factoring so heavy in the education platform is because for some reason, first of all, I like what technology brings to the table in terms of efficiency and reducing the turnaround time and just the productivity, the level of productivity that it brings. But I've always been attached to institutions that have been at the forefront of technology. When I went to the University of Buckingham, it bragged about being the #1 industry insofar as technology in England. When I got into the banking sector, and there was a private bank that I was working for, Lombardie, Daria Hench, they also spoke about their being at the forefront in technology. And a lot of the things that I learned and that I gleaned at those institutions, when I got into the positions of leadership in my various careers, and when I went into the Bahamas Development Bank, I facilitated a whole digital transformation. Everything was manual. And I looked for the best inside that industry to bring them in to just transform this bank. We had to update the phone system, move it from analog to digital. We had to update the whole backup system, move it from analog to digital. We had to take everything that was just sitting in drawers and put it in a digital platform. And the same thing when I got to the DNA in terms of moving toward a whole branded experience and making sure everything was on this My DNA platform, taking our accounting software, moving that digital so that there's more transparency and accountability, but just improving efficiency. And even when you look at some of the content on the DNA page, you can see that we are just creating a habitat for the creatives, because I don't really consider myself a creative, but I have an appreciation for the creative. And I like what it brings to the table and how it just it gets you more engaged and just makes you more inspired to want to go to that next level. And so the whole intention that I have is to I want the best coming to the table. And it's just unfortunate that Ms. Powell was turned away, because when you're talking about moving from point A to point B and a whole systematic change, you want the best of the best that's coming to the table and who is going to be able to. And in fact, I think I sat and I met with her And she and I spoke about this whole transformation process and bringing her on board to be able to just look at how we can actualize a lot of the things that I want to move from this analog era into digital. So just how you heard me talk about that orange village, that cultural village, where there's a hub, and looking for a hub where I just want to get persons in that tech field sitting there who, because I believe we can have somebody produce a Facebook. I believe that. Why not? I believe we can have somebody who can produce a search engine like Google. I believe that. I want to get these persons in that space who would have been in communities like Google, like she has been, or wherever, and bring that expertise back to the table like I did along my career path and brought it to the table to improve the institutions that I'm in. So I want those persons to be in a hub to come and improve this place that we call the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Certainly a remarkable response, and I think we can all agree that in terms of not just digitizing but modernizing ourselves in terms of technology, we would be able to see a turnaround in so many processes that must be administered by the government. I saw a comment on Facebook a few minutes ago, someone talking about the NIB checks and all of these different things. There's so many small pockets that become incredibly difficult because we've not adapted in several areas to the use of technology, and of course we know that the expertise is here and it exists, and there are so many people who are already working in these spaces that can chart the course for change and bring about what it is that we need to have in our country to make it a more livable society for our people. So I want to quickly go over to Joseph. I don't know if you want to share any final thoughts based on the things that we've spoken about tonight that you'd like to leave with our viewing audience.
Definitely. I'm somebody who believes in the revolution. And I make no apologies for that. I believe that sometimes systems need to be burned down and rebuilt from scratch. There's 2 points that I just wanted to touch on before we leave. Is something that you said that stood out to me is removing the Queen as head of state. I stand with that. But another question, or I guess another symbol that I think needs to be addressed are the statues around this country that don't reflect Black faces, the people that live in this country. Now, there's a statue, I assume he's Christopher Columbus. I've heard some person say that it wasn't, but as far as Bahamians are concerned, it's a statue of Christopher Columbus. I believe that needs to be toppled over for the sake of the Arawaks who were here before us and have since perished at his hands. And so I think symbols like that, we need to sort of uplift Black Bahamians, and it doesn't automatically have to be politically based or politically driven. I mean, I have no opposition to a statue of Chippy Chipman, or some other faces in the community that have shaped our culture and have driven it to a particular point. The second point that I wanted to touch on was, I know that you would make mention to Bahamians being entrepreneurs, but I do want to acknowledge that not every Bahamian has an entrepreneurial spirit. And so I would want to point out that I believe that we should also have legislation for persons who want to work a 9 to 5. I think that a lot, our employment laws at the moment don't reflect a benefit for workers. And that's something that we possibly need to look into doing as well. And also having a system where you have to have a certain amount of Bahamians working for your organization, but also it shouldn't be a situation where a foreigner could work in this country and do something that a Bahamian can do as well. And if a Bahamian can't do it, then that Bahamian should be trained to do that job. I feel as though we should possibly look into a system where we give temporary visas, and it's hard. So if somebody from, I don't know, Brazil decides that they need to come to the Bahamas and work, they should be allowed to work for 2 years. And I'm sure we have many Bahamians who can work in that position after they would have been taught for 2 years. And so those are the 2 things that I just wanted to talk about: representation of Black Bahamians in society, and in our culture, in our statues, and also Also looking out for persons who don't aspire to be a businessman or businesswoman, people who, because you have to have people working, you have to have worker bees. And so those worker bees should also have some level of protection. I think that we should also look into doing that as well, because I know that our employment laws are very, very antiquated and they lean more towards the employer rather than the employees. But I like everything else that you said. I think it's brilliant, and I'm excited to see more of you. And I look forward to seeing the other candidates, because that's also very seeing the other candidates, because that's also very important, because you know your leadership and your visions are great, but you know, unfortunately our laws are such that you know you can get you can get voted in, but if you have no one else, you know, then we still stuck with the data set. But I definitely support everything you said, and I look forward to seeing more.
Thank you.
Yes, Mrs. Komolafe, I just want to say, personally, it's been a pleasure to sit on this call and I guess from a distance, personally interact with you and hear you. I've heard your works. I take keen initiative or effort to listen to whenever you speak and read your writings and the papers and what it may be. And being on this video call, I see the level of genuineness. And you spoke about females in power, and I just want to touch on that. Myself as millennial, I personally don't look at gender in terms of positions of power. I am very much, my aunt, I won't call her name, but she's a former politician who rallies me all the time and tells me my Cuban studies have made me put on this machismo about me, where I think the man must be this. But contrary to her own belief, I hope she's watching, but I'll tell her later, you know, I believe that women do hold a place, and, you know, I'm a practicing Christian. I say that for a reason, but we won't go down that road. But I think that God has very many feminine-like ways. And I think that in those feminine-like ways, and even in Christ, the compassion is a trait of a woman. And I think that there is definitely, and I'm going to say a place, not to say that women are not leaders, but there's a place for women in leadership, because we need that love, that compassion, that motherly care that we as men will never be able to possess. So I support you wholeheartedly. I'm not saying I'm a supporter of your party. I'm not saying I'm a supporter of any party. I'm being very plain spoken, but right. I think that you have a place in the leadership, the governance, and the rule of our country. I'm very impressed, and I'm going to go back to my parting words of our last citizens' response, and I promise that this is how I'll always end. Ubuntu is a word on my arm. It means I am because we are. But I'm going to swing it a little bit. My plight is agriculture. You are a financial services person. Stefan is an environmentalist. Joseph is an all-around activist. We all have our place, but we must know our place. Not necessarily know our place to say you can't delve into other things. I'm well-versed, you're well-versed, we're all well-versed. But if we fight our own battles collectively, I fight agriculture and you fight financial service, and we see where they connect. Stefan fights environmental affairs, and we see where the three of them connect, and we continue to connect everything. I cannot be happy if you're not happy, because we are all one. And it's just like the Bible tells you, eh? We are but the body of Christ. Like, you know, this Black Lives Matter, you have a lot of people who are against the Black Lives Matter movement. They say, how can you say only Black Lives? No, it's not the only Black Lives Matter, but Jesus said, if I have 100 sheep and one goes missing, is the 99 more important than the one? or is the one equally important? Because if I don't have that one, I don't have the 100. And that is what we must look at as a collective, as a people, as a country. And I believe in regional support. And the Caribbean has very long been a disjointed and competitive region. We compete against each other. I went to school in Cuba where as a Bahamian, oh, you all be, and there are people from all over the world, but the Caribbean people always stuck together. And I was abnormally accepted in the Caribbean community because my great-grandfather is Bajan. And I didn't hide that. I said, man, I'm one of y'all. We only a boat stop away from each other. But until we, and not only the region, but we as Bahamians, eh? Because we have some brothers and sisters who have different last names, just like I'm a William. My grandfather's father was a Williams. They tell me I'm from Marklands. I'm from Marklands. My roots, my Williams come from Barbados. You know, we could talk about all the last names that come from Turks and Caicos, that come from Haiti, that Bahamians don't think they're Haitian or don't have Haitian roots. We must get rid of this xenophobia and remember that we are one people. And until we can come together as one Bahamians. And, you know, I had a conversation today and we talk about the Pythons and the Simonex and all of them. And they only couple generation from us, you know, let's be real. And I lived in Abaco where, like I told you all earlier, after Dorian, everybody was one hugging and kissing up on each other. Like, so happy to see you. We need, and it's sad that it took Dorian to do that, but maybe we need a national Dorian, and COVID ain't even doing it. I think COVID is doing the adverse effect in some ways, but we need a national Dorian to show us that we are all one people. We are one Bahamas. What does song say? One God, one people, one Bahamas. And I support you with removing the Queen, 100%. And that's a republic, but that's national sovereignty. Sovereignty. That should be the key word, eh? Sovereignty. And everyone who is watching, go and Google or look up in the dictionary what sovereignty means. We should be sovereign individuals, and then we will become a sovereign nation. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Ms. Komolafe, I certainly want to give you the opportunity. There are, I dare say, hundreds of thousands of Bahamian people who are looking for progress, who are looking for a plan, who are looking for hope, who feel disheartened, who feel discouraged. And I wanna give you that awesome responsibility of as you give your final remarks, what do you say to those Bahamian people who are looking for the way forward?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you once again for this opportunity and to Stephen Sands for extending this invitation for me to be here. I thoroughly enjoyed my time here tonight. I love the host. I love the panelists. It was, I couldn't think of a better way actually to spend this evening. And I'm so glad it's these types of things that gives me an opportunity to engage persons of the same mindset. And so that is always a positive thing for me. And the fact that you would have extended this hand to the DNA, which is not necessarily always extended in mainstream media, but here we are in social media. And that's what I like about this new digital age, that it tears down all walls and it is the equalizer and it creates a level playing field. And that's what we're all about in the Democratic National Alliance. This whole idea of equal opportunity for all, for Bahamians. And I spoke about this, what I call the AIO principles earlier, access, inclusion, and ownership. And this is why we're so excited about these great team of individuals that we're bringing on. And I talked earlier about this call to action and the digital leap that we took with that by putting that out there, showing, not just speaking what the new Bahamas could look like, but showing people in advance what the new Bahamas could look like just by you watching the transformation and the evolution and the development of the DNA. And so it's very clear that, you know, because I think it was Mr. Lewis who asked, where's my team? It's very clear that I make it known that I could not do this all by myself. There is a whole team of individuals behind me. Even if you go to our page and you look at our videos, we have a director of video production and we have a young PR chair. We have graphic designers on board, but we're always looking for talent and for persons who are prepared to come on board and to help us with this journey toward what we believe will be a rise in government as well as to help with the platforms and policies to help sharpen our ideas. And so to you, Mr. Lewis, and to everyone else who are glad that you raised that point, I can tell you straight off the top, you're going to be, I hope you're going to be pleased in a couple of days. I trust that you will when you see the great team of individuals that we have who are ordinary citizens, but have, just like we all are, just like I am, but who have that care and that passion for the development of the Bahamas. I'm looking forward to engaging all of you, Evans, in terms of good governance and transparency and accountability, and Lewis on the creative side. And as Gibson say, you are all around kind of guy. And certainly Gibson, as it relates to that agriculture, I believe that this is just the beginning of what's going to be a great dialogue moving forward. And as you said, Evans, we must continue the dialogue, right? These are the types of conversations that we should be having. We've continued to assess the problems. We know what the problems are. It's now time that we talk about the solutions, and those who are the skills and who are the experts and the technocrats in the areas must come forward and say, you know, Ms. Komolafe, you're making some sense, but on that, and you know, perhaps you need to do some more research there because X, Y, Z. I like that type of intellectual challenge because we need to get it right. And as we are moving forward to ascending to government, and when the next general election, we want to be ready to go. Because to your point, Evans, when you said, what should we be speaking to the people who are listening? I want, because I've been hearing this thing and I'm very disturbed by it. And I know sometimes we say it as vehement and then we rush to vote anyway. Persons are saying they're not going to vote. We're saying that you have an alternative. You should not, first of all, squander your right to vote because there are so many who fought for it, right? There were persons who fought for the franchise for women, and there were persons who fought for the franchise of the poor, because back in those days, you can only vote if you had a company or if you had property. So there were too many people who fought for us to have this franchise for us to squander it. There are persons who are coming forward who want to represent this nation at this time, and it's not easy to stand in representation at this country at this time. We are at the worst point we've been in our living memory. And so for persons who are coming forward now, we should applaud those that are coming forward and not tear them down, but let's look how we can build them up and get to that point of unity so we can get where we need to go. And it's only when we have a unified Bahamas that we can have a stronger Bahamas. And I agree full-heartedly too with Gibson that when we have a unified CARICOM, you would be amazed the power that we're going to have on the international stage. We have to move away from this this feeling of isolation and xenophobia and everything, because we all have a similar story, and iron sharpens iron, and that is how we're going to get our strength. And I'll tell you, I see the Bahamas as a global power. If other people don't see us that way, well, you know, that's their prerogative. But I see the Bahamas as a global power. And there's a scripture in the Bible that says, and a little one shall become a great one. The world is waiting on the islands. And I like to quote that scripture. They're talking about the Bahama Islands and they're talking about the Caribbean islands. We are the strong caucus of the diaspora, and the world is waiting on us. And I'm telling you, get ready for this revolution. The Bahamas is going to be at the forefront of it, and the DNA is going to lead the charge with that. So with that, Mr. Evans, Mr. Sands, I thank you for this platform. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much for those powerful sentiments, and of course, thank you to our panelists for adding input, for giving very deep commentary on some of the things that are mattering to people most in this day and age. I personally want to say, Ms. Komolafe, I think that it is important, regardless of anyone's political persuasion or background or affiliation, that we acknowledge the need to support Bahamians that support Bahamians. That is something that has to come more at the forefront of our culture. We have to continue, you all talked about xenophobia, we have to continue to also push back against this black crab syndrome culture where we are pushing people down, and open up our ears, in the very least, to hear people out. And while it is a personal choice, whether we listen or whether we don't listen. I think that we put ourselves in a much better position when we decide to listen to the voices that are speaking, and when we decide to lend support to those that want to advance the agenda, not for personal reasons, but on the behalf of every Bahamian person. I certainly want to applaud Stefan for organizing all of these panels, and from my stance, working for an organization that is doing that is pushing for good governance and economic development, and many of the things that we've talked about around the clock. It is so inspirational to see the citizens decide that we are going to create a platform where we can hear what we need to hear, where we can get more diverse voices at the table, where we can truly discuss without fear of repercussion the challenges that Bahamian people are facing, because it is high time we cease to ignore the reality. And the reality is that no matter what your political affiliation is, no matter how you feel about any individual leader or candidate or representative, we need change. We need change. We need change desperately. We need change before the next election. We need change for the Bahamian people, and we need the Bahamian agenda to be pushed at the forefront, because many of the countries that we idolize, like the United States, they check for their citizens first. And the Bahamas needs to get to a place where we push the agenda of the Bahamian people to the forefront of everything that we do, so that every man, boy, woman, and girl that lives in this country has the opportunity to live a life that is worth talking about, a life where they can be comfortable and successful, where they can find gainful employment, where they can be safe, and so many other things. So I want to say once again, Mrs. Komolafe, thank you so much for sharing your insight that not only inspired, but truly educated each of us and many of the things that the DNA is putting forward, and giving us a fresh look on the fact that we are not at a brick wall, that there are things that we can do, that there are possibilities, that there are ideas that have yet to be explored. We will definitely be continuing this conversation as a group with other members of the public. And I see many people in the comments on Facebook saying that we need a part 2, we need to do more. I'm not at liberty to make that decision, but I can surely say that I would fully support it. And I know that in the near future, we will be speaking to another representative, Mr. Cassius Stewart from the Bahamas, from the BDM. I don't want to get it wrong. But like I said, the important thing is that we listen to the voices that are speaking to us and that are pushing our agenda. So to everyone that has joined us, we want you to please share the broadcast before you log off, so that the others may get the opportunity to be enlightened and to hear all of the wonderful things that have come forth in this discussion. And to our panelists, once again, to Ms. Komolafe, we cannot thank you enough for offering your time to us. Everyone that is watching, the information I see has been posted on the Facebook page for where you can learn more on the DNA's website if you're interested in learning more about their policies and their plans. And I just encourage everyone to be an active citizen, to stay informed, to let your voice be heard, to support forums like this where we push the Bahamian agenda. So with that, I want to say thank you one more time to everyone for joining us tonight, and please be on the listen for what is to come next. Thank you so much and have a great night.
Thank you.